for being a blessing to us, and consistently giving us this wonderful space to host press conferences in. So I'm gonna bring up the pastor of Mount Olive Baptist Church, Pastor Dwayne Gillison, to welcome us. Pastor Gillison.
Good morning to everyone. We welcome you to the William Gillison Fellowship Hall. I'd like to open up our meeting with a word of prayer. We'd ask that you bow your heads. Father God, we come thank you, Lord, for your grace, your mercy. We thank you, Lord, for blessing us with yet another day. Now, Lord, we ask that you be in the midst of this meeting. Bless us with wisdom as we seek to advocate for our children, our community. Bless each and every one of the sound of my voice. All of these blessings in your darling Son Jesus' name we do pray. All God's children said together, amen, amen, amen. God bless you and welcome.
Right. First of all, I want to just give a special thank you to all the media, particularly the local media that's here, and all the media that's statewide, for joining us today. We are joined by advocates and colleagues from all across the state. We have people from Rochester, from Albany, New York City, Long Island. And so we are really excited today about this milestone moment in the fight to bring justice and proportionality to our school systems of suspension and expulsion. For 8 years, we have fought at the state level to get a uniform set of standards to make suspensions a last resort through the Judith Kaye Solutions Non-Suspension Act. Knowing that they have devastating consequences on Black and brown children, children with disabilities, low-income children who are LGBTQ, but the legislature has not acted. And so we're excited because today we're here. We're here because the state education department has made a really important step in moving us forward. The state education department convened a task force, the Safe Schools Task Force, to look at an issue that we have, as parents, have been raising for years. When we talk about it here in Buffalo, me and Jessica has been the District Parent Coordinating Council, and a lot of other groups have been advocating for this issue of suspension to be dealt with going back to 2008. And in 2015, state legislation was advanced. So it's been 8 years in state legislation trying to get this passed. And finally, the state education department convened a task force to look at the suspension. And they issued a report. The report is here, recommendations for reducing disparities and reforming school discipline in New York State. And in that report, they recommended what we as parents and advocates have been saying for a long time. So we've been, at least in my opinion, we've been validated and vindicated for things that parents have understood for a long time. High rates of suspension do not happen in wealthy white communities. They happen to children who are vulnerable to systemic oppression and where schools struggle to get resources they need. We hope in 2023 to start a new day for our young people and our educators. Earlier this month, when the New York State Education Department delivered the report to the Board of Regents with the recommendations that closely align with the provisions of the Solutions Non-Suspension legislation. And it cites research and evidence that support the reality that local control leads to more punitive measures, and we need the state to step up and show leadership. Buffalo is a prime example of this. Despite hard-fought battles to protect our kids and the drafting and adoption of a code of conduct many of us hope would change things for the better, it hasn't worked. This school year alone, there were 200 suspensions in the first 17 days of school. We don't need to tell y'all who it most impacted. The most important thing to remember is that suspensions do not work. And that's what we want to get across here. It's simply that they don't work, which this report explicitly acknowledges. They do not make schools safer. They don't reduce incidents of misbehavior. It makes no sense to follow a system that is both harmful and ineffective. Thank you for joining us today to mark this tremendous report and join our fight to get solutions, not suspensions, into law. So I'm very excited about bringing one of the legislators who have introduced a representative of the legislators who have introduced the Solutions Not Suspension Act. So I'm going to bring forth to speak Aaron Rose Collin, who is the policy director for Senator Robert Jackson. Aaron?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here in community with you all. I want to thank the reporters for showing up. This is extremely important. As was said previously, this is a fight that has been going on for decades. This is an amazing report that proves exactly what we know. You know, trends are persistent over decades. Suspensions are racist, ableist, classist, and ineffective. So the School Solutions Not Suspensions legislation provides restorative justice practices to provide interventions that can effectively address student misconduct, hold students accountable for their behavior, and most importantly, foster healthy relationships within the school community, because that's what this is about. It's about school climate. We want teachers and students to feel supported. This is a holistic bill to address all of those things. There's been a lot of misinformation about what this bill actually does. It limits suspensions to a 20-day school period, and it limits classroom removals, and it prohibits suspensions for things that we know are targeted towards specific groups of students. So violations of school dress codes, students in pre-kindergarten through grade 3, tardiness, unexcused absences, leaving school without permission, failure to provide identification upon request, little things that are used to push students out of our schools when we should be supporting them. There are many issues that have been addressed through reintroductions, and I believe with partnership with the many amazing groups that we have in our coalition, families and students that are standing alongside us, that this is the year to truly make a difference, especially with this report, which supports everything that our bill has listed out. So I'll speak briefly because I know there's a lot of voices here that we need to raise up.
And thank you so much, Aaron, on behalf of Senator Robert Jackson. The Solutions Not Suspension Coalition has been fighting this, leading this fight on a statewide level, but right here locally, where this issue has a huge impact, that fight has been led by Jessica Bauer Walker, who is a BPS parent and a community health worker. So we're going to bring up Jessica Bauer Walker. Give a hand for Jessica.
Good morning. Again, my name is Jessica Bauer Walker. I'm a Buffalo Public Schools parent of 2 children and a community health worker, president of the Buffalo Public Schools Community Health Worker Parent Association, which is a Board of Education recognized parent group. I've been working on this issue for over a decade now, and it's unfortunate that not much has really changed. In this past year, my own child was suspended. Even as somebody that's a professional advocate, I could not defend my child against what was happening to her. And it just helped me to really see on a whole next level that Buffalo Public Schools systemically is not following New York State education law or their own code of conduct. And when I've talked to my colleagues in other cities across the state, they've shared similar things. So we know suspension is a discriminatory and harmful practice. It is hurting our children. Every day we see this, and we see there's layers and layers of exclusionary discipline. Our children come to school late, they get a detention. If they get too many detentions and they don't serve them, they get suspended. And we can really see the school to prison pipeline is extremely active. We see our students in Buffalo getting suspended if they're Black, 2.5 times the rate of their white counterparts. Same thing if they have a disability, if they are of low socioeconomic status. This is such a discriminatory and harmful practice that it needs to stop. And we are asking for state intervention at this point. So we're really encouraged by the recommendations of the New York State Education Department. We are calling on our legislators to please, this bill has been in the state legislature for much, much too long without action. So we're begging you, please help us, please help our children. We need to keep our children in school. We need to stop punishing our children who have been with layers and layers of crisis, who are exhibiting mental, emotional, and behavioral health issues. They need help and healing. They don't need to be punished and excluded from school. This also puts a huge amount of strain on parents. Working parents are having to stay home with children who are suspended, oftentimes losing their job and losing income. So it's really an issue that has so many ripple effects for children, for parents, and for communities. And it's an urgent equity issue that really needs to be dealt with. You can get an in-depth look at this issue via a white paper that we wrote around Buffalo in particular at nyclu.org/Buffalo school suspension. And again, this is very much in line with the state ed recommendations and the solutions not suspension bill. So we're all saying the same thing here, from the state education department to legislation that is on the floor right now to our local advocates on the ground. So we're asking for action, and we hope that this call can really make some progress in the state legislature this year. Thank you. Next, I'm going to bring up Khadijah Hussein, who is a little bit younger than us. She can talk about her experience not that long ago in Buffalo Public Schools as well. She is a parent and a caregiver to her siblings, and she is also a community health worker and member of the Community Health Worker Parent Association. Khadijah Hussein.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Khadijah Hussein. I am a community health worker and family advocate with Connect. I am also a parent of 2 small children and a caregiver to my younger siblings. Today, I like to be here. Usually when I send a message, I like to also share stories to get the message across as effective as possible. Just kind of sharing my own story. And when I speak to the students that I work with today, and a lot of times they would tell me like, you don't understand, you don't know how it feels like, but just kind of letting them understand that I do understand, because I've been there before multiple times. I got suspended before for being bullied over and over and over again, and no one in the school was able to help me. I was just keep being told to ignore them, or they're just goofy, or they're just that, and all these excuses that was made, but no one was there to help me. No one was there to pull that student aside and do something positive, like a restorative circle between us, or something that would really help me. Instead, I was just being told to ignore until things went really bad. Just telling my students that I know what it feels like to get bullied. Just telling my students that I know what it feels like to go through mental illnesses, depression and stuff, anxiety, and feel like no one understands, especially going to school and trying to explain to your teachers that I couldn't sleep last night, or my parents were arguing this morning before I had to come to school, or just the reality of what a lot of us go through, getting bullied at the bus stop, or getting bullied on the bus, or even just the bus coming late. We couldn't even tell these stories to school staff. When we come into buildings, we were told that that's not my problem, or wake up earlier, or go see a counselor, but no one actually guided us to find the right person to talk to. It was just go do this and go do that, and we got treated like adults that knew what they were doing. And a lot of times when we fight back, we got suspended. So telling my students today, I graduated from Buffalo Public Schools International Prep 7 years ago in 2016. And just knowing that these things are still happening is quite heartbreaking. My younger brother went to a circle a couple months ago that Erie County Restorative Justice hold. And I used to wonder growing up, why was he always in trouble at school? But then he shared for the first time, and I heard this for the first time, that one day I got in trouble at school and the principal told me that you're just a number. You're just a number. So if you don't come tomorrow, or no one will notice that you're not here. So these are the kind of things that our students are told. And then we're expected, the students are expected to be, great in school with no attitudes, with no, behaviors, bad behaviors, what they call it. We create monsters in our educational system, and then we wonder what happened. So this act is a very important act to me. It's a very important act to a lot of parents and students. We need to create, find solutions and not suspensions, because many of these students, well, all of these students that are getting suspended are students that don't want to get suspended. They want to be doctors, they want to be nurses, they want to be social workers, they want to do something great out there, but we take away from them, and then we wonder what happened. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khadijah, for giving that perspective. Now we're going to go to some of our downstate partners, and I'm going to start off by bringing forth Christina Bingham, and she will bring forth Dawn Yuster. Christine.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thank you for allowing me to lend my voice and perspective to today's event. My name is Christine Bingham. I'm a staff attorney with the Long Island Advocacy Center. Our agency has the privilege of working with families across Long Island whose children are impacted by school discipline. This can take the form of a child being sent home, schools repeatedly calling parents and asking them to pick up their child, or formal out-of-school suspensions. We know from the statistics and from our lived experience that suspensions disproportionately impact students of color and students with disabilities across Long Island and New York State, and those most impacted live at the intersection of these identities. Every day, parents reach out feeling stressed, overwhelmed, frustrated, and unsupported. They face impossible choices of needing to go to work to support their families or stay home to be available to their suspended child who now has no safe place to go. They are asked to navigate a system that feels overly punitive, arbitrary, not child and family friendly. And at the end, which may be days, weeks, months, or an entire school year, return their child to a building where both they and their child feel unwanted, disconnected, and unsupported. Every day we meet students ranging from our youngest school-age children in kindergarten through high school age, who may be struggling with the development of coping skills to manage stress, peer relationships, and the demands of school and life. This may be due to unmet education needs, behavioral health needs, unattained skills, or normal developmental struggles. Childhood and adolescence is a time of growth and learning. However, rather than learning from their mistakes and developing stronger skills, we remove and exclude these students from their environment and their community. Demand of them not to make the same mistake and expect different outcomes. We miss the crucial steps of skill building, determining the root cause, and helping students learn. The current system is not working. We applaud the recommendations offered in the report by the Safe Schools Task Force. The solutions offered to these complex issues require, as the report points out, collaboration between the legislature, executive, school leaders, and families. The time is now for New York to turn towards systems that prioritize connection, are proactive, restorative, and strive to keep students in the classrooms learning. We need to pass the Solutions Not Suspensions bill, a critical step in prioritizing all of the students in New York State. Thank you. I'm going to throw it to Dawn Euster, a colleague and advocate for students in New York City.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Dawn Euster from Advocates for Children of New York, School Justice Project, and happy to be here. This is really such a long time coming. The Solutions Not Suspensions bill it's really pretty extraordinary that the state education department worked diligently with members of various professional associations and coalitions and a few advocates, including us. We're at the table at the Safe Schools Task Force to come together and really look at disparities in school discipline. And what all of these folks came up with were the same things. And we're talking about primarily folks who work on the school district level. We're the same things that are, many of the same things that are in our bill in terms of making sure to be proactive and provide, include preventive measures like restorative practices, promote healing-centered practices, trauma-informed practices, and fund these types of trainings and practices. In addition to what's in the bill, it's saying we as a state should be prioritizing this and keeping our students in the classroom, and suspension and should be an absolute last resort, and that suspension is an adult response that is inappropriate, and that we have to stop. This has to stop. We have to turn the tide and do things differently, and we can do them differently, and our young people deserve it. And other provisions in the bill that are very similar to what is recommended by the state education department, including educators throughout the state, or limiting suspensions to 20 school days. which is still a lot of time. It's a month of time, except in rare situations. Having no suspensions for our young kids who are pre-K through 3rd grade, except in when really rare situations, if at all. And really having these preventative measures. The report even goes further and talks about training, in-depth training for educators to really learn how to use these practices and data collection to see how things are working, which is critical. I'm going to leave it there. It's just been a pleasure seeing everyone, and we know the state can do things differently, and we're looking forward to seeing some big changes this year. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Christine and Dawn. Next, we will have coming to us from Rochester, Eamon Scanlon, the policy director, the education policy director for the Children's Agenda. Eamon.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks everybody for being here. I just am going to keep my comments brief and wanted to highlight that this issue really does happen across the state. It's not unique to Buffalo. It's not unique to Rochester or Long Island. And that's why folks here are from all across the state are pushing for the same thing. And we're so happy that the New York State Education Department is also pushing in this direction. You know, the local school board here in Rochester passed a resolution just a few months ago in support of the Solutions Not Suspensions bill, because they recognized that as local leaders, they don't have all the tools they need to implement reforms. And as we fight, and we fought a very similar battle in Rochester that was fought in Buffalo in 2016, we had the code of conduct reformed. We had restorative practices introduced and different alternatives. And there was some progress, but that would be upended with changes in leadership. There were some schools that did absolutely nothing. There was not a uniformity, and we didn't have all the legal tools and all the pieces that the state could provide to make sure that this is implemented. And it's not just a problem in the city schools here in Monroe County. We have huge disparities in a lot of our so-called progressive suburbs. In Brighton, which is a very wealthy community near borders the city of Rochester, Black students are suspended 5 times the rate of white students. And the families of color there's a group of Brighton parents that are very alarmed by this. And they're also going to be coming with us to Albany to push for this bill. So it happens across all communities. It happens across the state. And it's not something that local leaders themselves can simply tackle because they've tried for years and they haven't gotten to where we need to be. So we're really happy that NYSED is in support of the same elements that the Solutions Not Suspensions bill pushes. And now's the year to pass it.
All right, thank you again, Eamon. Now we will go to the Capital District, and we have Joanna Miller, who's the director of the Education Policy Center for the New York Civil Liberties Union, and she was also a member of the New York State Education Department Safe Schools Task Force. Joanna.
Good morning. Thank you, Sam. And thanks to all the advocates in Buffalo. It's been, I'm so grateful to be able to work alongside you and the young people who are fighting extreme inequities in school discipline in your region. And we're so glad to be here today. I will talk a little bit about our statewide work, including from our office in the Capital Region. The NYCLU has 200,000 members and supporters and 8 offices around the state. So we do have a bird's eye view of how this is manifesting across the state. And so I'll touch on that a little bit. First, I just want to thank Commissioner Rosa and Chancellor Young for taking this issue seriously and issuing their powerful recommendations on school discipline. It represents a massive amount of work. And we are so pleased to finally have this in paper to show the state legislature that they have to listen to our education experts in the state, the leaders of our education system. I want to be very clear. We are talking about a civil rights crisis. By not passing this bill year to year, our state legislature is tolerating and propping up a massive discrimination system against Black students and young people with disabilities. There's simply no other way to put it. Attorneys from my project, the Education Policy Center at the New York Civil Liberties Union, work with families across the state. We give advice, we represent kids, we file appeals. literally from Long Island to Buffalo, we are fighting these same battles over and over to keep kids in their classrooms. School districts systemically violate students' constitutionally guaranteed right to an education by refusing or failing to follow transparent and fair discipline processes. And of course, there are some bright spots. We've seen some huge progress in districts, including in New York City, which we're very proud of, some big progress. But by and large, school districts across the state act with impunity when they push out Black students for arbitrary infractions through unfair processes, if there's a process at all. And my friends in Buffalo know very well that sometimes there's no process at all, even an unfair one. I'll just give a couple of examples from our recent work. In the Hudson Valley School District, vicious anti-Black bullying and harassment was ignored and dismissed until the student reached their breaking point, at which point the student of color, who was the only Black student in his entire grade in a predominantly white district, was punished for merely existing and trying to survive. In the Capital Region, we've been working with attorneys who report that students with documented special needs are being pushed out rather than providing them with the support services that they're entitled to. In Buffalo, students whose parents don't speak English are forced to act as translators in their own discipline hearings, which denies their right to participate in a fair process. And those are literally just 3 highlights. I could go on for a day, and I'm happy to do so. If any reporters want to follow up, we could give you chapter and verse. I think the point I'm making is that allowing this piecemeal district by district approach to the reform of school discipline is a failure. Districts have not and cannot make the progress our kids deserve. As a state, we literally cannot educate and graduate the leaders of tomorrow by locking them out of their own classrooms. Students who were in kindergarten when this bill was introduced are almost finished with high school now, if they're still in school. The time to change this was yesterday. So this year, the state legislature and Governor Hochul must listen to our state's education leadership. This is a bold step by the commissioner and the chancellor that our political leaders cannot ignore. And we must adopt the Solutions, Not Suspensions Act now. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Johanna. And so we will close with having Shoshana Herskowitz from the Solutions Not Suspension Coalition wrap us up. Shoshana.
Thank you so much. I want to raise one additional point before we close it out. Everyone has spoken really eloquently about the elements of racism and classism and ableism that exists in this. I want to add the point of learning loss. We keep hearing from the state that there's been this tremendous learning loss. And while this bill predates the COVID-19 pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic has really exacerbated learning loss. And we see it in the drop in test scores. It's also exacerbated the youth mental health crisis. And these are both points that were raised in the governor's State of the State. So when kids are struggling, the place they need to be is within their schools, where the resources exist, where the educators are, where the social workers are, where the people who can help them through crisis are. And if we remove them, we are continuing to exacerbate this problem. So this is the year. And the New York State Education Department has clearly thrown down the gauntlet. They have said this has to be all of us in it together, educators, the legislature, the governor, parents, students, all of the stakeholders have to come together for our kids. And that is what we're here for today. 2023 is the year, and we applaud the New York State Education Department for saying what we've been saying for 8 years, for codifying it, for putting it in writing, and for saying that local control is absolutely inadequate. So 2023 is the year we pass Solutions, Not Suspensions, and Governor Hochul signs it into law, and then we do the work of implementation. So I want to talk really quickly about next steps. I'm going to share my screen so you can see how you can get involved if you'd like to learn more, which of course you do, because this was a very, very poignant press conference. So here you go. If you'd like to join the Solutions Not Suspensions Coalition, you can email me. That's my citizen action email. You can also, we ask that you contact your legislators and ask them to support this act, because we want to move this to the floor. We want to make sure that our legislators are in support of it. We're asking you to go to your local school boards and raise this up, because while local control isn't enough, it's important that our school board members understand this And last but not least, we're asking you to sign on as a supporter. We've got this letter right here, and we want to just raise this up from New York City and Long Island all the way to Buffalo. Have parents, have advocates, have all the stakeholders sign on and join this coalition with your support on our letter. So I will also post all of that in the chat, but I'm going to stop the share and I will turn it back to Sam.
All right, thank you so much, Shoshana. So that's it for the press conference. We will start off by opening up the floor to local media if you have questions, and then we'll go to any media that's online. So local media that's present, any questions? Let me bring up Jessica to speak to that.
Are you referring to historically or recently? Both? Okay. So Buffalo Public Schools does actually have a really good code of conduct. They did a public process over this past summer where they allowed families and community to give feedback. We gave our feedback again. We've done this every couple of years. And again, there's a lot of good stuff in the code of conduct, but we're just not seeing it implemented. So restorative practices, which is an alternative. We could do a restorative type of situation for conflict resolution versus suspending children. We're not seeing very many of those actually happening. Parent conferences in lieu of suspension, positive behavior interventions. This language is all in there. There are some people that have been trained in buildings. We as parents and students have received training ourselves. I think there's just a real failure in terms of implementation and lack of capacity and infrastructure to get the job done. I think that they say that they're committed to it. There's a lot of good language again, but the lack of capacity, I think it's a huge culture shift because we're moving from a punitive type of infrastructure to a restorative one. So it is a type of practice, right? We say a lot of times it's not just a training, it requires relationship building. So when we talk about restorative practices, it's when students come into the building in the morning, sitting in circle and having a morning meeting and talking with each other versus, get out your worksheet and let's get to work. So I think it requires a major culture shift, and it requires everybody in the school building to be committed, from, the bus drivers and the sanitation workers to the principal to the teachers, and it takes work to do it. And so we say it has to be a whole school, whole community, whole child approach, and we found that it's very piecemeal and siloed at this point.
Somebody from SNS want to take that? So when we say NYSET, maybe Joanna, she was on the task force. There's language in the recommendations that talk about the NYSET is asking them to support legislation. Joanna, you want to talk to that?
Yeah, sorry, Sam, we can't hear the questions because they're not mic'd. So could you just repeat it for me?
Yeah, so he's saying that we've said that the state education department supports the legislation. So if you could speak to what it says in the recommendation that speaks to support for the legislation.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So the state education department, I think, is not, they didn't publicly name the legislation in the report, and certainly I'm sure someone there could explain the mechanisms for why, but I have a feeling there's maybe some rules or some policies that prohibit them from taking a stance on the legislation. But short of that, the recommendations in the report are aligned perfectly with what this bill would do. So it's not naming the bill, but they're calling for the state to pass legislation that does these things. And these things are all things that are already in the bill. So it's as good as a stamp of approval from the state education department to say, not only can school districts accomplish these things, but they must, and the state has to change the law to require them to do so. So all the provisions they're recommending are within the solutions, not suspensions bill. And Dawn was also on the task force, so I'm not sure if there's anything else to add from that, but we don't know everything that happens behind the scenes, but that's my sense of what was going on.
You want to add anything, Dawn?
Sure. Just briefly, is that I think there's a couple of critical things that the NYSED, the New York State Education Department, is recommending in the report that is not directly in the bill, but that our coalition is certainly advocating for and has advocated for in past years, and that is funding. So, for the, for training, for coaching, for implementation, for restorative practices and various trauma-informed and other practices and healing-centered practices that really create the kind of school climate environment and setting where students are welcome and comfortable and supported. And so I just want to point out that the funding piece is not in the actual Solutions Not Suspensions bill, but is certainly something that we support. At the same time, we don't think it is imperative that there be funding tied to the bill. That absolutely there's so much in the bill that so many of these provisions, you don't need funding to stop suspending kids from school and from keeping them supported in school, because you're just switching the resources in a lot of situations, because there's so much money and time and energy, spent on, providing alternative instruction and education and documenting incidents. So it's really, it's not funding is just one component of it. And the other thing is that the report does talk a lot about training and supporting school staff in being able to learn how to relate and engage and interact with students differently, so that they'll get a different response, and that they'll learn different ways of supporting students and engaging with students and families.
All right, thank you. Any other questions locally? Oh, wait.
See a representative from the teachers union here. Do we know where the teachers stand on this bill?
Anybody from SNS want to tackle that? We got any idea where the teachers stand on the Solutions Not Suspension Act?
I'll hop in to say that the coalition and Senator Robert Jackson have been in constant good faith conversations with upstate and downstate representatives, from administrations to teachers, across the board, with our education chair, Shelley Mayer. This is a constant conversation that we're having, so that we're communicating what the issues that they have are and addressing them as we move forward, so that we can pass it this year.
So they are engaged in the process. So what we want to do now, if there are media that are online, if you would just raise your hand, we will acknowledge you. Any questions from media that are that's online? All right, so media online going once. Media online going twice. All right, we're gonna assume that you got all the information you needed, media online. And with that, unless anybody has a closing comment, we are going to move to close our press conference and just really, oh, we got a hand raised. Okay, all right. So with that, for all our colleagues across New York State, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for all the efforts that have been made. And this is just the beginning of the fight. Now the real work begins. One of the big important lessons that we as parents have learned when we've changed this policy at the local level, changing the policy is just the beginning of the process. Then you have to go ahead and make sure that you're able to get the policy implemented, get it implemented with fidelity, with proper funding. And one of the next steps you have to be able to do is have to have it codified in law. So to the extent that we are able to take this next step in 2023, it will make a difference in the lives of all of our children. So we hoping that 2023 is the year. And so we looking for everybody to follow through on the recommendations that were made in terms of ways you can participate. And we thank you once again. Bye-bye, everybody.